Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. Hey, it's great to be here with y'all on my back porch. It's a rainy day in Georgia. I'm sure you can hear it. You'll probably be able to hear it the whole show. That's just the way it is. Good for the garden, good for the ducks, good for everything. Except our dock. Our dock is now, the walkway is partially underwater. But that's the way it goes. That's all right. So today we're blessed to have Professor and Dean Hunter Baker with us, and I'm really looking forward to this. He is a man who is committed to Christ, and everything else is just gravy, right? His looks, everything else is just. I know you're going to enjoy this. So in order to get ready for him, so we can move from this place where it's raining and thundering and the dogs are running around scared. Let's go into that place where we're ready to meet Hunter and share our love for the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay. So, as we breathe in slowly, we'll say the first half of the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. And then as we breathe out, we'll say, have mercy on me, a sinner. The second half. Okay? All right. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Now breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Breathe in slowly last time. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Okay. Resume our normal breathing now. Now that we've been reminded who we are and whose we are and in whose peace we dwell, let's bring on Hunter Baker. And let me bring you, and they can now hear you and see you, Hunter. Hey, it's good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too.
So where are you?
I'm sitting in my home in Jackson, Tennessee, which is a town of about 100,000 people between Nashville and Memphis on the west side of Tennessee.
On the west side of Tennessee, right. So
yes.
When I go up to North Carolina to serve our mission there, it's in the western part of North Carolina, which isn't far from Tennessee, but it's like a day's drive from where you live.
That's right. Yeah, West Tennessee is not the mountainous part. It's the river and farmland part.
And what do you do out there?
I'm the Dean of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at Union University.
Yeah, awesome. And so you've had to make some pretty serious pivots, right? Both as a teacher and as an administrator, right?
Hold on. Doug, have I lost my video? Oh,
no, we're all good. We're all good.
The cat came and knocked it over. I'm sorry.
That was so awesome. Yeah, so you've had to make some pivots, right? You've had to, figure out how to serve your students, figure out how to serve your faculty. How's that going, and what does that look like?
Well, I mean, amazingly, we, when we had to move to online back during March, and I'm not sure I would ever have believed that we would be able to pull it off as we did, because being a dean and being at a traditional university, we're always trying to find ways to add revenue. We're a tuition dependent university, like a lot of many others, and when I try to get faculty to do stuff online, they don't want to, right? I mean, it's not of course what I'm dying to do either, right? And despite that, when the time came, we were able to move online, and it went a lot better than I think I expected. So I'm really, honestly, it's probably divine providence smoothing the way. It worked out all right.
Yeah, awesome. And it's really a tribute to, it's for me, it's that American spirit of adaptability, adapt, overcome, the entrepreneurial. Let's get people what they need as best we can, and it's been awesome to watch. And because I'm also a student at the University of Georgia, to be a recipient of that kind of service, and then to be a part of providing it, as a teacher, it's a tough time, but it's a tough time that we're in together. And when we make those I don't even want to call it sacrifice. When we make those changes for other people, we're doing something that is real and that is good. And in a difficult time, that kind of connection with Christ, that's so important for us. So how is it that you are, because a lot of changes in your regular routine, I imagine a lot of stress. Y'all are trying to as an administrator, you're trying to figure out what does this mean for, well, not summer anymore, but now for fall, for winter. And so just, and people needing things from you, and you don't have enough data, so there's uncertainty and all these kinds of things. And certainly you don't want to subject people to risks that are unnecessary. How is it that you are maintaining your peace, the peace there in your home?
That's a good question. And actually, Doug, one thing that's relevant is, I guess your audience doesn't know that you and I were at University of Georgia together long ago. That's back when Doug was rolling with a haircut about like mine. I think you had come out of the military, hadn't you?
Right, I was still in the reserves. I've recently been through, airborne school and all that kind of stuff. So that airborne glow was still about me.
Yeah. And, it was actually while we were at University of Georgia that I developed a problem that I don't think I realized I had, which was severe anxiety. I don't know if you remember that, Doug.
I do remember we talked together, and it was
right.
really challenging for you, right?
That's right. And when it happened, it was a huge fear of failure, which is funny because academically I did very well in the program, but had a crushing fear of failure, crushing fear that I was going to have to go home and just be in disgrace and live in my parents' basement, that kind of thing. It didn't work out that way, praise God. But I was just crushed with that feeling. And, during a time like we're in right now, I think a lot of people are probably struggling with that sort of thing. Especially with a lot of the economic dislocation, the fear of what's going to happen. And honestly, those of us in Christian higher education, we don't know what's going to happen. Yes, we can move online, but parents don't send their kids to our schools really to go online, right? I mean, they send them there because they want their kids to be interacting in person with somebody like me or my colleagues. They want them to be with each other, spurring each other on in Christ. They want them to be having that kind of strong spiritual life experience, with our staff at the university, and so we really want to continue to be able to offer that, but that's a challenge, and we don't know what the secular authority is going to tolerate, or allow, and that sort of thing. But I will say this: I've been through some other difficult times in life, and it's really interesting to me is that I feel like that each time God has one word for me, and that word is endure. Endure. And what it takes to endure is you have to trust God, right? You have to have faith, and that part of me, I think, has grown and become stronger over the years because I've seen that I can trust God, and He will be with me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful testimony and so important. Endure, right? Yeah, and we have the witness of the church has been one of endurance, right, in some very difficult times. And
Yeah, and certainly the Orthodox Church, right?
Right. And
Yeah,
we're part of that legacy.
yeah,
We are not equal to our fathers, but we are in the same Christ that they were in. And he is the one who strengthens us. So how did you develop that kind of faith? How did you end up as a professor and as a dean at a Christian college? Because when a Christian college, a Christian university, when it's selecting not just professors but especially administrators and mentors and fellows, they're looking for people of a certain cut, right? How did you get to be that kind of mentor, someone who had that kind of witness that they valued?
well, around the time you met me at University of Georgia in 1992, um, I had come from Florida State University. Had spent my teenage years in Pensacola. Um, Came from kind of an indifferent church background. A lot of those of us who are Southerners, at least back then, you had some church, right? Whether your family was really into it or not. And people would invite you to lock-ins and things like that, and you'd hear some Atlanta Brave give a recorded testimony or whatever. Um, but I went to college. I was totally and completely not a Christian. I was very secular. My passions in life were probably sports, David Letterman, and Bloom County, which was a popular comic strip back at the time. And I can remember coming out of a cafeteria at Florida State, and a guy from Campus Crusade for Christ asked me if I had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I was like, "Who are you?" I thought he was a nut, right? And and actually during that time, I was embarrassed by the words Jesus Christ. It seemed like something a normal person would not even say. And all I can tell you, without dragging it out into my full length testimony, is that oddly God got hold of me. I got to college. I entered into the party scene. My dorm was a total Sodom and Gomorrah, and and after a particularly bad night and hangover the next day, uh, where I think I legitimately feared I would die because I had I don't know 14 double vodkas or something like that. Uh, I told God that I would go to a religious meeting of some kind. Uh, and I did. I went to an InterVarsity Christian Fellowship meeting, and it wasn't immediate. It wasn't a lightning bolt. I thought I was going to go to one meeting and never go again. Uh, and it wasn't like I went and it was just so impressive that I had to keep going. But something got hold of my spirit, and I just kept going back. And over a period of months, and through reading books that were available at the InterVarsity book table, I came to believe that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead, and that's when I became a Christian, and have been ever since. And yeah, I don't think that I knew that my career would end up with me being an academic. Um, actually, Doug, when I left the University of Georgia, I had zero plans to be an academic. I did not imagine myself doing that. I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think I could write a dissertation, and my program didn't have a thesis component like yours did because I was in the public administration program. But over the years, God showed me that that was indeed my calling. Um, and it's been a great career. I couldn't have asked for anything better.
Yeah, so one of the things let's talk about academia a bit.
Yeah.
There's a perception that academia is hostile to faith, or at least indifferent to it, right? If not hostile to it. And yet here you are. I mean, you've published excellent books. You're an active scholar, tenured professor, dean, a fellow. You're active outside of university as an intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
What Is that true? Is it a misperception? How does that work? Is it more nuanced than just, oh, you have to keep your faith hidden or else nobody will take you seriously? What does that look like at conferences and so
Uh, I think it just depends. I think that there are parts of the academy where it varies by people, right? But there are definitely parts of it where someone with an obvious religious faith or coming from a religious institution would be viewed with disdain. I have a friend who still teaches at a university that has an obviously Christian name. Mine doesn't. Mine is Union University, right? So it's kind of mine just sounds like any American university, right? Even though we're very strong Christian university. But I have a friend who teaches at one of those city denominational name university, right? And and he would tell me, he'd be at a conference and people would look down at his name tag, and as soon as they saw what the name tag said, they didn't want to talk to him, or they would seem to dismiss him or something like that. So there's a component of that. I don't think that there's necessarily overwhelming hostility, but certainly there are some who reject the faith entirely. And with the change in our view of human sexuality, I think that some of that has gotten worse. So, for example, if you were in the discipline of philosophy, there has been a very strong effort to delegitimize the Christian institutions and to not permit them to advertise positions and things like that because of the outrage associated with their view of human sexuality.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about this because I want to talk about one of the changes, the culture in academia, especially in secular academia. I don't know what it's like at Union, because these trends certainly haven't hit the seminaries, right? I mean, I teach at seminary, which is intentionally Christian, and so we have an orthodox or traditional anthropology, right, where Christ came to heal our tribal divisions. We are a new nation in Christ, whereas it seems there's a strong preoccupation with identity that defined in a way that is, if not apathetic to Christianity, then I think it's antithetical, right? This celebration, this definition of self as opposed to other. This is, it's contrary to the gospel. And if you say that, of course, it's like it's worse than the name tag. They're like, that's not science, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing that I always emphasize with students. Now we're Baptists. Not everybody is, and not everybody has to be. I don't know if I have any Orthodox profs on campus, but I at least have a couple of Catholics. Not that it's the same. I know it's not the same. But that having been said, one thing that I have always emphasized with students is that we need to think in terms of the church as universal, right? That that it's the brotherhood and sisterhood of human beings under the fatherhood of God. And so for that reason, now I'm not really talking about identity politics so much, but I might be talking about something like immigration. And I tell the students, look, it's totally legitimate to have laws regarding immigration, things like that. But a Christian should probably never be like a really strong immigration hawk, keep those people out, right? These are your brothers and sisters. And that the nation, I'm not going to meet the United States of America in heaven, right? The United States of America has no eternal destiny, but your fellow human beings do have an eternal destiny. As G.K. Chesterton says, all around you are immortals, right? And we need to honor that and to dignify them. And so, yeah, a lot of the tribalistic stuff where we identify ourselves over against other people is totally counterproductive. And and against what I think God intends for the human race.
Right, right. And, it must, I would imagine, I don't know if you've taught much outside of Union, but I know the difference between teaching at seminary and teaching, like at the Naval War College or somewhere else, right? Ohio State. And it's, teaching is teaching, right? And connecting with students, that is, when you develop rapport with somebody and value them as a human being, you're doing the gospel, even if you're not using the words. But how much extra value is it to be able to give things their proper names?
Yeah.
To say, look, that other person has value because X, Y, and Z. Whereas otherwise, you can have the similar principles, but they're not rooted. They have no ontological significance in academia. And it's a problem because it undermines your ability to have a serious discussion.
That's totally true. I mean, one thing that I have tried to, and actually I think that I have come to this more and more myself over time, is to recognize the need for humility. So, I was always a combative kind of a conservative. You may even remember me arguing with our joint boss, John Clark, over things at times like term limits or something like that. And and I loved shows like Crossfire, and I can remember I used to call my friend during Crossfire. We'd call it the beginning, we'd call it the commercial break, and we'd call it the end. Just to replay it as though it were a boxing match or something. And over time, I have learned as a professor and as somebody trying to be a scholar that kind of combativeness is not necessarily conducive to learning, right? I mean, I will stand strong for the church. I will fight for the church. I signed the Nashville Statement of all things. So if you want to know what that is, look that up. But I have learned that it's very important not to come at learning and thinking from the position like as though I'm a University of Tennessee football fan, or somebody taking a side in a war. And I try to be so even-handed. Sometimes I'll even say to my students, because I try to be sympathetic as I explain the other point of view. And sometimes I'll say, now remember, Dr. Baker's on Team Jesus Christ here, but I'm trying to give this to you in a very straight, sympathetic way, right? So that you won't receive it in a jaundiced fashion. And I think they appreciate that.
Right. And you're modeling something that they're not going to get from watching the news. Right.
Right.
We're increasingly polarized. All the polls are showing this, that, it was terrible a generation or two ago. The polling would ask people, how would you feel about a close relative marrying someone of a different race, right? And,
right.
There was, people had a visceral reaction against that. That's thank God, that's mostly gone, right? But now if you ask someone, how would you feel about someone you care about marrying a, person of the opposite party?
Yeah.
It's back up where that was, right?
Yeah.
What in the world? Where's the gospel in that?
Yeah. Well, the terrible thing that has been learned is that news can also be entertainment, and that one of the most entertaining things possible is to have our opinion confirmed. We love to have our opinion confirmed. I know it. I feel it, right? I mean, I can remember years ago, I used to go to this gym in Houston, and I would get on the treadmill, and it was total luck of the draw as to which TV would be in front of you on that treadmill, right? You might be in front of Fox News, you might be in front of CNN or MSNBC, and maybe because this was Houston, too often the one that was available was the one in front of MSNBC. And I can remember I would be watching Ed Schultz, who had a show back then, and his show was always the same. Demons are breaking through the crust of the earth, and they're going to consume us all, and the demons are the Republicans, right? And I would feel hot and bothered and unhappy while I watched that. And whereas if I watched somebody I agreed with, I felt cool and reassured and all is right with the world. And unfortunately, all of the news companies have realized that that's where the money is. It's in the confirmation of biases, and there is no straight story out there anymore.
Right. So cross-cutting cleavages, their relevance are becoming less important as the salience of that political cleavage becomes so much more dominant. It's a huge problem, and you nailed it. This is one of the huge driving mechanisms is news media as entertainment.
Yeah.
Have you seen Cernovich's Hoaxed?
Say that again.
Cernovich. He's got a documentary called Hoaxed. I think it's called Hoaxed.
No, I don't think.
Okay, so he's an interesting cat, right? And people were recommending this, and I'm like, yeah, media bias. I get it. I don't need somebody else telling me about media bias. What's his agenda, right? And I'm watching this thing, and the first half of it is pretty much, it starts out a little weird. It starts out about Pizzagate, right?
Okay.
And it's saying, look, this is the crazy that can happen. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. And then it goes into a more traditional kind of play into the audience, right? It's something that a conservative would expect to see. This is media bias. This is media bias. And you're like, yeah, this is awful, right? And then he does it. He changes. You got to watch the whole thing, because then he brings in Black Lives Matter. And you're like, wow, what's this? And what he's able to show is that the media has neither the conservative nor the liberal media have been objective in reporting Black Lives Matter. They've framed it from both sides in a way that divides us, right? And I was like, what? How can I not know these things about Black Lives Matter when I watch both liberal and conservative media, right? In order to know these things, you'd have to go straight to the source somehow. And,
right.
I don't know what I don't know, so I don't go straight to the source of everything, right? I hope that I can find balance by looking at different sources. And you can't if the goal is actually to divide us so that they can reap in that revenue. So it's not a perfect documentary, but it's good because it challenges everybody.
Oh, yeah. Well, and let me tell you something else that I have learned over the years. I have done a lot of radio and other media over the years, and I can particularly remember a couple of times where it seemed like they only wanted somebody to come on if you could be counted on to take a stereotypical Christian position the way they expected. Right? And if you're going to do anything other than that, they don't want you. And I think that sometimes you may wonder, hey, what happened to that person? Why did they go on and say that on TV or something? It's because that was the way to get on, right? That's the way to get attention. And another thing, I ran for Congress back in 2016. Yeah. Not enough money, not even nearly enough money, but I kept telling myself that my background, my expertise, this would matter. The media would care about that. They would talk to me. They would listen to me. And that was not really the case. But I know, Doug, that if I had started railing against the Muslims, and talking about tearing down mosques and things, I would have gotten all the coverage in the world, right? But give kind of a well thought out Christian view to public policy, nobody cared.
Right. Yeah, that's so funny, right? So people are decrying, nobody likes expertise. This is one of those conversations that's polarizing us, right? And no, they don't want expertise. They want expertise that tells them what they expect to hear, right? So here you are. I mean, you're like a lawyer, a political scientist, a MPA, public administrator. I mean, you've got all this going for you, and you're like, no, I've actually got a reasoned opinion on these things. Come on, give us some sound bites.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
So over time, the system will select leadership that can play into that, right?
Absolutely.
And
yes.
so you end up with, these, like the Netherlands has a pillarized system, right? Where and we end up with that without the kind of institutional mechanisms to make it work. We just become divided and can't have a conversation with each other. So how about church there in Western Tennessee? Is it polarized? Is it political? Do people self-select into conservative or liberal churches?
Yeah, in terms of, so in a town like this one, in terms of liberal churches, there's not a lot. I think that much of America has gone through this. Outside of the biggest cities, the mainline kind of liberal church is sort of dead. Because, I mean, as Walker Percy said, why not just read the New York Times instead, right? I mean, what's the point if there's not really a there? So in a town like this, we have a lot of conservative Baptist churches. There's one church that is toying around with female clergy, so they're kind of falling out of the orbit of the conservative Baptist churches. We actually have now, Doug, I may have the nomenclature wrong. We have an Orthodox something. I don't know if it counts as an Orthodox church. It's like part of the Antiochian community or something, and they have it's a very small building, but they have like a golden dome on it, so we have something Orthodox. I don't know the people. We have kind of our Pentecostal elements, and our big Methodist church just recently broke in half. Half is not accurate. It probably broke heavily in the conservative direction, but they broke up. They're breaking away from the Methodist congregation over human sexuality.
Yeah. So the Methodist Church, they haven't come to formal schism as an organization yet, but locally, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And God bless them. It's so hard. So how is your church dealing with this coronavirus, and is that response politicized? So one of the things, a conservative impulse, at least my conservative impulse, is a distrust of authority, right? If you tell me I can't do something because it's too risky, I'm like, I bet I can, right? Don't tell me what to do, right? This is one of the responses that is kind of knee-jerk within us. What does that look like? What are the nuances of church policy there?
Well, the big battle that's going on in our town is that a lot of people feel that the government is violating free exercise by preventing us from holding church services. In fact, 2 Sundays ago, somebody went around and put a notice on every single church telling them that you're allowing the government to take away your constitutional rights, and you need to start gathering immediately, so some sort of a pamphleteer or something like that. I think that, so speaking from one government guy to another, okay, my view is that this is probably the government acting within its strongest realm of competence, right? That sort of fundamental order and safety stuff is kind of at the heart of what government is about. So in a time of a virus like this, it seems to me probably reasonable. It probably seems more reasonable because of what the technology allows us to do. If we were doing this and we really had no way to gather, it would be much worse than it is. The other thing is that in the places where the government has been unreasonable, it seems like they have been stopped. So I can remember one church was trying to meet outside in a well-spaced kind of a setup, and the government shut them down, and the judiciary intervened in that case. So I think that if we wanted to, we could be doing that. By and large, the churches here have been observing the rules. We watch our church on YouTube every week. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if in some parts of the community there are people who simply refuse to give up church. More kind of underground, or maybe inner city, things like that. But I don't have any evidence of that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been interesting. Speaking of overreach, and then the kind of, because they're figured this out too. Look, you went to MPA. This is not on the curriculum, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, like in Knoxville, which isn't all that far from where I serve in North Carolina, it came out, I think, on a Friday. That Knoxville had come out with their new rules. This was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that these rules had very specific things to say about church that were more onerous than like restaurants and stuff. And even made theological statements about communion. Right? Recommendations like, instead of giving communion, tell people about the real meaning behind it, right? Oh, that's no. That's not in your competency as the government to tell a religion how it should interpret its own sacraments. No. Yeah. You can tell me that. You can even tell me that the way that I do communion, you can govern it in the same way you govern a restaurant.
Yeah.
That's the competency, right? And I say that as a conservative, right? And as someone who, well, anyways. But when you tell me how to interpret it, no. And in this, it showed up on, I don't know where else, but it showed up on Instapundit. And I imagine there was a lot of instant, feedback, which is the way democracy works, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I was able to pull up the Knoxville guidelines, there were like 2 pages of just blank spaces that had been for church. The guidelines for church, and there was just one line: see the Tennessee guidelines.
Yeah.
Right. So, we can get spun up about stuff, right?
Yeah.
That really they didn't mean it. They were just honestly trying to help. It was overstepped. They moved back. Okay, and our polarization might lead us to see, oh, this is just an attempt, the camel's nose in the tent for tyranny, right? And we always have to be on guard against tyranny because the state is such an effective problem solver, right? But that's still, to judge someone's intent so harshly, not fair. For me, it's the equivalent. It was very hard for me to be called in class a symbolic racist, right? And what the term symbolic racist means. So because of my view that you should see people based on their, the Christ in them.
Yeah.
That's how I see their value, and that's how I evaluate them. Is based on, if I'm going to evaluate them at all, it's based on their outward virtue, right? But that in academia, that is called symbolic racism.
Yeah.
Right? Because and the reason it's called that, to be, charitable, is because that can hide and keep you from noticing legacies, right? Prejudicial legacies, discriminatory legacies, right? Okay, I get that. But it's very hard to be called that because racism is an intent, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's to me what we're doing on race. I understand the heart of what people are trying to do, but but if you think about what it takes to have a free society, there has to be uh, some sort of integrative force. I don't mean like a violent force, but something that integrates, something that pulls people together. Very often, religious faith forms that function, or it can be a type of patriotism or an agreement on virtues or whatever else. But there has to be something like that. And to me, and academics are the most guilty of this. We're just constantly deconstruct, pull apart, pull apart. If there's a scab, let's pull that scab off. We never allow the healing to occur. It's just a constant act of deconstruction. There's a Norman Rockwell painting that I really love. It's one of the four freedoms, the freedom of speech. And I was looking at that painting the other day, and I love it. People should Google it. It looks like some sort of a civic gathering, probably in a school, a public school or something like that. Just a classroom in a public school, and this man is rising to speak, and he looks like a factory worker. He's got kind of his flannel shirt and his rough jacket and pants. And he has like a program rolled up in his jacket pocket, and you look at his face, and he's about to speak. And one thing I really love that I think that Rockwell probably did on purpose, he looks like an idealized Abraham Lincoln, more handsome than Abraham Lincoln, because Lincoln wasn't very handsome. And the people around him, some of them in suits and ties, some men, some women. And they're looking up at him. They're all listening attentively to see what this man will say, their fellow citizen, right? And I look at that painting, and I think about how inspiring that painting is. And I think a lot of people probably look at it now and they say, there are no people of color in this painting. And I understand it. I understand. But at the same time, you're dissolving, right? You're not building up. And I think that's a real problem that we have. Academics don't like to build people up.
No, they don't. And so they make myths that are deconstructive and divisive.
Yes.
Right. So yeah. And whereas we have the myth, we have the true myth, right?
Right.
That
Right.
builds up, that reconstructs into something greater.
Yes.
And so when we see something like, a lot of the works on identity, right, that tear up, what our reaction is, this is the facts. There are facts there, but the overall story isn't capital T true.
Yeah.
It's not serving the purpose of the good. We need to be held accountable, right? So we have to study things like race. We have to study discrimination. All of these things. It's got to be on our radar, and we have to hold each other accountable. But it's gone past that, and it's problematic. But how about this? So when we as Christians offer this different vision of humanity that transcends, sex, gender, race, all these things. It transcends it and moves us towards the greater. It's the field has to be so ready for the harvest. How is it? So, as a parent, I'm gonna put this in your wheelhouse, right? I'm gonna give you a chance to make some money here, right? So I've got two teenagers. I've got one who's already in graduate school, and I've got one who's in elementary school. But I've got two that we're like, where are we gonna send them? Right? One of them, he's going to be a junior, and the other one's going to be a sophomore next year. Make a case, one, for academic study. right? Why should we send a child to university rather than sending them to trade school or apprenticeship or something like that?
Yeah.
And then why should we consider a university like Union University, or specifically Union?
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, one of the things that I have learned, I think part of the reason that I became a college professor is that I think there's something magical about that age. There's something about that 18 to 21. You know, you're leaving home for the first time, and you're leaving that group of kids you hung out with very often, right? You're entering into a new situation, and I think that there is a receptivity that comes along with that. Now, that receptivity, you know, if you send your kids to the wrong place, that receptivity may come back to bite you, right? You may get a stranger back at Christmas break or something like that. You know, thank God at Florida State, I kind of fell in with the right people. I really think it was the grace of God. Um, but but it just seems to me that kids can be open, they can listen, and I especially find that sometimes in my classes, I will take a moment to get off of the academic material and to just say, okay, this is just a life thing, right? This is just a marriage thing, or this is just a parenting thing, or so. And every time I do that, I feel like they're totally focused, right? Like they're totally ready to hear that. And I think that there's just something special because they know that they're on the edge of going out into the world on their own, right? And they're ready to learn and to listen. Um, but one thing that it does take in order for the whole academic thing to work is there does have to be that receptivity. I think that there are some kids out there who are not open to the process, who it's just drudgery. Um, and I don't know if that's because their intelligence is running in a different direction. You know, it's more kinetic. It's more the use of their hands and their body, or super pragmatic, or whatever. And if you have that kid, it might make sense to try something else for a year first. Um, but again, this is why I do what I do, because I find so much satisfaction in being able to speak into a life. And I'm not sure. I don't know how many college professors in the secular world really think that way. But as a Christian college professor, and I think most of my colleagues, we think the same way. This is our opportunity, right? This is another form of discipleship. And what was Socrates doing, right? It's something kind of like that, right? Except that we're doing it for the true Lord. And all I can tell you is that I see it over and over again. Sometimes if we could do an advertising campaign, I would have pictures of our graduates with like a something over their head that says something like "works as unto the Lord" or "believes in absolute truth," you know, or something like that, right? Because when you watch somebody like that working for you, that's the kind of person who comes out.
Yeah, that's awesome. So great point. So as a parent, I know my children pretty well, I
Yeah.
hope. And, so we do have local junior colleges and things like that you could always test things out, take a gap year, join the military or something. Um, what and the extra value of sending your child, your young adult, to a place like Union is the intentionality, it sounds like. Look, we are
Absolutely.
going to disciple your kids. We're gonna help them become the man and woman that God has called them to be. Not
That's right.
cookie cutter, right? That's
Not
not
at
what I
all.
hear. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing is, when my parents dropped me off at Florida State, which at that time was probably a campus of, I don't know, 30,000 plus, back in 1988, I was completely adrift. I mean, yeah, I don't know what would have happened to me if I feel like God just reached out to me and kind of plucked me out from just falling into a black hole. Um, and I don't say that to castigate Florida State, but at least in my case, I was totally not prepared for that. I went and the complete lack of structure and really any kind of adult supervision, I was lost in it. Um, and it's again, I don't really take a side in the whole election free will type deal. But it's funny when I look at my own conversion, I can see it both ways. On one hand, I can see it like I made a series of choices that led me to become a Christian. And then I look at it a different way, and it's like choreography, right? I was just doing the steps, and I think in God's mind the two things coexist, right? We can't
Oh, absolutely.
put it together, but I think in the mind of God it does.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and it's not the case that sending your child to even Union University is going to guarantee any
Right.
specific outcome, right? Because there is that free will. But yeah, I went to the University of Georgia uh, as a 17-year-old, and I wasn't ready. I would have been, if I'd have gone to one of like Young Harris or something like that, it, um, I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I learned, and
Yeah.
those lessons make me a stronger pastor. But whew, when you're looking at your kids, you're like, man, I just assume they learn some things the easy way if it's possible. But for me, it was going. I joined the Army after 2 years at the University of Georgia. I was like, this is a mess, and I don't see how it's going to get better.
Yeah.
Let's take a break, And then I came back and I was self-disciplined, kind of knew who I was, and then uh, never doubted Christ. Right? I grew up in a God-fearing, God-loving home, very active in the church and so on, but it wasn't an active part. And then when I got married while I was an undergrad, and it was that relationship with my wife that we grew in Christ together, and that's how I end up where I am now, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, some people, they're just not ready at 17 or 18 for that. But so is it the case, like at the University of Georgia, you could make it through however long it takes you to graduate without ever having anyone take an individual interest in you? It was so random.
Easily. Yeah. I mean, I'm often, having had the experience I did at Florida State, I'm often shocked by the degree of attention that is expended on every student at a place like Union. When I went to Florida State, when they told us to register, they just handed us a catalog, threw us in a room full of telephones, and said register. Whereas at a place like Union, you're going to sit down with a human being and you're going to talk about it. They're going to help you figure out your schedule. Every single semester when you register for your classes, you're going to meet with your advisor and talk about it. The student life is watching over you. Faculty are encouraged to report if they haven't seen you in class lately, stuff like that. Whereas at Florida State, I had a biology class that I may have attended 4 times the entire semester, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear that it's got stuff built in. What is Union? I assume that when you commit to that school as a faculty member, as a staff member, and probably as a student, you're also committing yourself to a certain way of life. What does that look like, and what's the value there?
Yeah, well, I mean, so if you're on the faculty, you have to be a Christian, right? I mean, probably not so much in a Baptist way as kind of a C.S. Lewis Mere Christianity kind of a way, such that people who are not only Baptists but in other denominations are able to be faculty at Union, even though we're predominantly Baptist. The students definitely have a code, right? There are only limited hours when a male can be in the female dormitory, very limited each day. so one of the things that is to us a potential source of a problem is that we have Christian norms of sexuality on campus, right? I mean, married, unmarried, whatever. It's going to be expected that there's nothing going on unless we're talking about a married man or woman, right? And so we enforce those norms on campus, and you see that, and they're everything is regulated the way you would expect it to be by a place that has a serious Christian mission. It's not oppressive, but it's there, and the students know it. Students don't have to be Christians. Baptists have a strong enough evangelistic kind of a mission that we don't require the students to be Christians, but they do have to live by the code.
Yeah, an interesting thing there is that even secular schools, they had similar rules, a couple of generations ago, right? Yeah. So that's another, whether, if people who are listening, that's either a benefit or something that goes against it, I have to say it's nice to have rules.
Yeah.
Because we've seen what can happen to young people, to anybody, when their passions take over their lives. Totally.
I mean, my dorm, I think part of why I became a Christian is that I went to some parties where I saw things that really disturbed me. I definitely saw predatory behavior towards women when I was at Florida State. If you said to me, Hunter Baker, your daughter is 15, would you send her to a large state school? The answer is almost definitely not. You almost would have to battle me to get me to send her to Florida State where I was. And it's not because I disdain Florida State. I love Florida State. But the idea of just setting her adrift in that atmosphere is not appealing to me at all.
Yeah, right. So at a place like Union, they'll be respected as a person, right? Yeah. And they'll be protected from predation and from becoming a predator, right?
That's right.
Because, without that governance, and, it takes a while to self-govern. It just does. So it's nice to have someone working with you in this. How about the spiritual formation? So you talked about mentorship, which is a huge part of spiritual formation. Are there things like chapel time, anything like that that's part of the daily routine?
Sure. Yes. And out there in the world of Christian colleges, that could be anywhere from 4 times a week to 1 time a week, or we have 2 chapel services each week that students have to attend. But the other thing is there's a lot of other stuff kind of built in. So when students come into Union, they all join what's called a life group, and they, very often I find that even by the time they're seniors, they're still close with the people who were in that initial life group that they were in. As an academic, I almost regret saying this, but I don't. Probably a lot of our students get as much or more out of the spiritual life program at Union as they do the academic part. It matters. I mean, and of course, a lot of that is just it's the community that you're in, right? I mean, the people who you are with, the expectations they have for their life, the fact that they're trying to follow Christ. Sometimes if you get a really good student leader type person, they'll say things like, I want to follow Christ so that if my peers are following my example, they'll be following him, right? That's that sort of self-awareness you get from the really good and committed ones.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful. I mean, another thing I like is that at Union, I love the fact that I feel like the students build each other up. I very rarely see students tearing each other down or harming each other, with their words. That's probably been the best part for me, actually, is to see the dynamic the students have with each other.
I love hearing that, because that means that we're working against this polarizations that is in effect. Because it may be the case that many of your students are conservative, but you're going to teach them how to do politics in a way
Yes.
that is not worldly.
Yeah.
And just so I want to clean up a point that I made earlier. The reason we started talking about racism was because the instinct to judge someone's intent, right? And conservatives tend to do it on the part of against liberals, saying that they're trying to bring in, creeping totalitarianism or something.
Yeah.
They may be hiding, they may not notice the way, tyranny creeps in, but calling them closet totalitarians is like calling me a closet racist. It's not appropriate. It doesn't help the discussion. It doesn't move us along. Instead, we need to look for actual indicators of things and talk about things as adults rather than, So
Well, and generally speaking, I mean, one of the things that I tell students is that it's important. If you're going to have a conversation, you have to assume the other person is not Lex Luthor, right? I mean, if you begin with the idea that they are they have just a dark heart, and that their real intention is to enslave and destroy their fellow, well, then there's no conversation, right? I mean, and I think that's why sometimes you get these terrible campus events where a speaker goes somewhere and people assault the speaker, or they try to prevent them from speaking, because that's the view they have. They don't give the person credit for being another human being who is trying to do the right thing, according to their own lights. There's just we have, and not only that, but if you think about it, the arrogance of the assumption that you are able to put that other person in that place of being the villain, right? The totally unredeemable villain. But we do that, and I encourage my students not to be that way, right? To always approach the other person assuming that they mean well, and then you can have a conversation. You can't if you don't do that.
yes, and that's the Christian way, to
That's
listen
right.
with open ears, not with judgment. And
Amen.
we do not do that well as a society. And I don't do that well as a Christian. It's something continually I have to learn, how my prejudices are affecting my ability to hear the other. And it takes not just intentionality, but trained intentionality to move beyond that. And if it's modeled at university, then it's worth the price of admission alone.
Right.
So,
right.
well, Hunter, I really do appreciate your willingness to spend time with us, come out here on a rainy day, at least in Georgia, and talk to us about your life in Christ and about the value of Christian education. And I am going to have Warren, consider going to Union University. So, keep your eye out for Warren Perkins. He's really smart. He's a good man.
Yeah, come and see us.
And do you have good barbecue?
We did. Well, come on. It's West Tennessee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, we had to bring that up. This is a huge selling point for going to Union, right? Is the food and the local culture.
That's right. That's right.
All right, brother. Again, thanks, and all of you, thanks for joining us. If you like this, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And until next week, Godspeed.